Okay, this is an introduction to Adobe Flash Professional CS6 from the perspective of creating your first desktop application. This relates to Unit 60 interactive media authoring, 61 interactive media design, and also it's in the context, placed in the context of Unit 12, understanding the interactive media industry. And we'll be working through this to produce an application which is aimed as a learning resource for people studying and understanding the interactive media. Throughout this, we are going to be working in a language known as ActionScript 3, and that is the first at the top of the Create New section you will be faced with when you first open the program. So the program we're looking for is Adobe Flash Professional CS6. That's the version we've got at college currently, and you will find that in Adobe Master Collection CS6, and it says Flash Professional CS6. And note that it's not Flash Builder 4.6. Flash Builder is a separate program where you only really work with script, and Flash Professional will allow us to produce all elements of the application in one place and publish out. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and start and run through this. So by clicking that, what I'm faced with is the stage, the white area. The grey area surrounding, in theory, is not seen, but depends on how you address when people resize your window as to whether they will see anything outside of that area. By default, Flash sets that to 550 by 400, which is quite small these days, but it's been the default like that for a while. We're going to be working with either 720 or 1080 sort of frame size, so I'll start with 1280 by 720, which is a nice reasonable size. Translate across both screen sizes quite easily. Remember, the context is you're aiming for a desktop output with this, so a large screen size is acceptable. Frame rate of 24 frames per second should be okay for what we're doing, and I think in this example I'm actually going to have a dark background colour. The background colour is set once. If you want different backgrounds, then you've got to actually create them as images. You can do that inside of Flash or outside of Flash. Okay, so I'm doing that. Just Control and minus. I can zoom out again. We can see my stage there represented. Okay, so on the right hand side we've got the properties window. It's a contextual window, which means that it changes depending on what you've got selected at the time. So if I've got a tool selected, say for instance the pencil tool, notice how the properties window has changed to give me certain properties that I would like to select. For instance, the stroke colour of the pencil, stroke width, style, for example, some rudimentary styles such as dashed, dotted, ragged, stippled and hatched. If you want complex strokes, really you should be designing in Illustrator and then bringing them across to Flash. Be wary of the fact that when you do that, all of your strokes will be converted to fills, and so there are some memory implications there, because obviously a fill is therefore more complex when it's representing a stroke. More anchor points equals more memory required. So if possible, try and keep your designs pretty simple in some respects. So it's contextual in that respect. It's also contextual in that if I was to create a rectangle, for example, like so, and then select it by double clicking it, it would then tell me the stroke width, the stroke colour, the fill colour, styles, and it would also tell me the position in the x-axis, position in the y-axis, so that's vertical, horizontal, and the width, how wide it is and how tall it is with the height. They can be linked or unlinked once created, so if I create the width, and that's how I can resize it there like so. I can also change some other properties, so say for instance give it a dashed outline and maybe give it a slightly lighter colour so it becomes more visible, like so. Okay, I'm just going to delete that off the stage, so by double clicking and delete, there we go. We also have a library. Library is where we keep all of our assets, so if we bring in any audio files, if we bring in any images, then they will be stored in the library. If we use any components, then they will be in the library too. If we bring any video in, we will probably have the video outside of the flash file, so that won't end up in the library. You can embed video into a flash file, but it takes up an awful lot of memory, and it's much more efficient to run it as though it's being streamed to flash rather than having it take up the entire timeline. Okay, so that's the properties in library. Some of the other panels, we've got colour, which allows you to select a colour for a fill or for a stroke. You can choose from solid colours, so a flat colour, a linear gradient, so that's a gradient in one direction, a radial gradient, which is a circular gradient, or you can even choose a bitmap fill, such as a texture. You can choose between HSB, hue saturation, and brightness, or RGB, which is two different colour modes that you can select from to work with. Obviously in HSB you go up and down the hue slider, and you can change the saturation like so. There we go, the brightness, so black as it were. There we go. So we can work like that, or we can work in R, G and B, which is quite a different way of working when it comes to mixing your colours, where you select the different components. So most people just tend to work in hue because it's easier to select a specific colour and then use this picker to find a different value for that hue. We've also got swatches, so once we've created a colour, we can add that to our swatch library by just clicking in there. That appeared there. We can name them as well if we want to. We've got align, which is used for aligning elements. We can either do that to the stage or just between two objects. Pretty straightforward. You can get basic info about something. Transform, pretty straightforward. Those are the main areas. We've also got a project window, which we may or may not use. It's a bit like working in Dreamweaver, where you sort out or create an organisational structure of your files. Okay, so first off what I'm going to do is go down to the timeline area, and you can see down here there are lots of blocks. These represent frames that may or may not exist. Currently the only one that exists is this one here, but we can have frames, which obviously gives us time, and then when we've got time we can have changes across time, so that would be animation. We can have as many layers as we want, and you also have folders so you can group layers together. The basic rules are that if you're animating something, then it would be one layer per animation. Okay, so this layer, the first layer I'm going to have, is just going to be my guide layer really, which I'll right click and turn into a guide to start off with, and this is where I'm going to set up my layout. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go to View, turn rulers on. My rulers are currently in pixels. I might prefer to work in preferences in percentage for this when it comes to creating a layout. Properties in this case. Turn the rule units across to well, it's going to have to be pixels. Okay, so if you want to work in percentage, you're going to have to calculate them themselves using a calculator. So my width is 1280. I could put in a 50% mark if I want to, which would be 640. Should roughly be around that. I think what I'm going to do is just put borders in about 10 pixels either side, so I just click on the left hand ruler to bring in vertical rules, go. Click on the top one to bring in horizontal rules. And what this does is it allows me to create snapping points, so when it comes to actually putting elements into the stage. Okay, so what I'm planning on doing is having a bit of a side navigation which will come in and go out based on hover, and then underneath that will be images. Maybe I'll allow images to take up a little bit more space. I'll have a bit of a border between the images and any text, and then what I'll do is I want to put in about 3 columns, so I'll just get my margin in there first for the right hand side. Okay, and that would give me, take that back actually, 520 up to 1270. That's easily calculated. 1270 minus 520. 750. I'll take off 40 for 2 borders, and then divide that by 3, which gives me 236. Okay, so I'm going to aim roughly around 235. Get that right. So that will put me on 755-ish. And then a little bit further on from that, so 20 onto that. 75 approximately. There we go. Okay, so I've got space for 3 columns, a little bit of jigging around afterwards to make sure that they fit perfectly. These are just rough guidelines. What I'll do is I'll follow one of those columns. Okay, so a guide is not visible, so I can draw anything I want on there if I wish to. And we can turn rulers on and off with view, rulers, turn them on, and guides, we can show guides or not show guides. So currently nothing going on there. Okay. So the first thing we're going to do is going to start creating layers for my interface. So call that UI for short, and I'll have one for background. So background will be what boxes. So in the background I'm going to create some rectangles. They'll just be flat rectangles, square edged and with no stroke. So the way to turn a stroke off is to click on the stroke picker and choose this up here to turn to stroke off. My background colour is just going to be a slightly lighter grey, and I will just put one of those from here across to there, which represents where images will go, and then another one for each column. So I'll do the first column, and then using the selection tool, this black arrow, I'm going to select it with one click, and then if I use the control key, that's right, I get a bit of conflict with this software, so I'll have to do this control and paste. So control C, control V. Get that lined up there, and then again for the last one, I'll get to this edge. It should roughly be about right. I'm just going to turn the guides off for a second. Okay, that works okay. My background, I think I just need to align the top edges, so I'll select all 3 of those by shift and click, so holding shift and clicking those 3 boxes, and then I'll choose the align top edge, but not to the stage, to each other. There we go. so everything should be aligned now. And the background layer can also be locked eventually. We want it to be visible, but we don't necessarily want it to be accessible. We don't want to change it too much once it's been decided. So there are the columns, and there are the images, and I'll just put my guides back on again. So vertical guides, and let's have something up in this top left hand corner which might be a label eventually, and then below there I'll create some rectangles for fly-in buttons. Okay, so they will go on the UI layer, and these will probably be multicolour eventually. I'll start off with a kind of bluey colour. Notice how it snaps like that. I don't want them to be too fat, but I also want them to be big enough to be visible and legible when read. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to create something that can be reused and changed using some code, so that the amount of elements we have are kept to a minimum, and therefore the file size is reduced as well. Okay, so I'm going to convert this to symbol, and that will be a movie clip, which is a kind of blueprint that we can reuse, and is also one that we can communicate with using script. And I'm going to call that underscore swatch. The reason I'm going to call it underscore swatch is because I will also have a movie clip surrounding that, so that I can change the colour of the swatch, and to do that I also need then to have a symbol that I can reuse. So we'll just call this UI button. Okay, and then that will allow us to be able to keep text separate from the swatch, and when we make colour changes there will only be the background that gets changed. So if I double click on this now, we can see that we've gone inside of UI button. Up here it tells us scene 1, UI button. UI button exists inside of scene 1. We've got layer 1, which is currently the swatch. It's very useful to give things meaningful names and orders. Above that we will have label, which is where we will have a text field which will be changeable. So when I've selected the text tool, I want to make sure that it's classic text and that it's dynamic text, because we're going to change this. At that point the font colour needs to be something that might be legible in all colours, so we'll go with a white, a reasonable size, and a text typeface that is a little bit more sensible than that one perhaps. I'm going to go with Georgia for now. Okay. What I can do is I can draw a text box across the entire width, and then we can use text align center when required. Okay, the text is going to be a little bit small in there, so I'm going to make that a little bit bigger, say 32 point, and then I'll just bring that into the center. Notice how it's snapped. Okay, I'll then give that an instance name, and I'll call that underscore label, so that when we start working with script we'll be able to access that label and give it some specific value. I've also got the format already set to align center, and the behaviour set to single line. Okay, see more. So then what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy and paste this object a few times. We probably need about 5 or 6. And using the guides that snaps pretty well. I've lost one of my guides, never mind. I can also paste in place, which will put it directly on top of the last object. And then I'll do that one more time. Let's Control Shift V for reference, and holding shift at the same time constrains its position so that it moves in either a 0, 90 or 45 degree angle from its original point. And I'll select these, and then we'll just distribute them in their vertical centres just to make sure that they've got an even distance. Apparently that was pretty even anyway. Okay, so that's the beginnings of our layout, or our example layout, and we will just end this video at that point because we'll be moving on to a little bit of code after this.